Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a Faith Through Lockdown conversation. And I'm joined by Becca, by Rachel and by James. I've just looked at them where they are on my screen. Where they'll be on your screen, I have no idea. So welcome, everyone. Do you just want to introduce yourselves? I'm sure everybody knows at least one or two of you, but just introduce yourself and maybe say what you do in the context of the uni. Becca, do you want to start?
I was going to say, who's going first? Yes, I'm Becca. I've been at Highfield since I was a first-year undergraduate, quite a long time ago now, and I work in the medical school, mostly teaching, doing a little bit of research, particularly look at personal and professional development and look after the first years.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I've been at Highfield Church for probably the best part of about 20 years now. I've been at the university for 10 years, and my role is that I run the secondary teacher training programs at the university. So I work with initial teacher trainees and also qualified teachers in and amongst the partnership schools around Southampton, Hampshire, Dorset, Portsmouth, Wiltshire.
So loads of liaising with schools as well.
Yeah, lots and lots of liaising with schools. Unfortunately, this year it's all been done through a screen, which has been challenging, but it's still great to work with the partnership.
Absolutely. James, what do you do? I mean, obviously you do a lot of yachting, we can see from, are all of those yours or just?
They were my grandfather's actually. He was a vicar. Wow. And when he retired being a vicar, he then started to make model boats.
Oh, wow. There you go.
It was really fun.
So apart from model boats, what do you do in the context of the university, James?
So I was a student there, and like Becca, I started at Highfield when I was a fresher. And then I now work at the university sport department, and I'm a deputy head of sport. And I manage people in all different areas, on water, at the sports grounds, in gyms. And I like to say I'm in the department of fun. I try and get people having fun and being happy and active.
Okay, the Department of Fun. There you go. So lockdown highs and lows. What's been great? What's been awful during lockdown?
I'll start with this one, Mike, if you like. I mean, I've been working from home since March last year, since the first lockdown, and for me, I've always worked in education. I've always taught. I taught in secondary schools and now teach at the university. So my normal working pattern is very regimented, very structured. Bells go, you move, you have to be in a certain place at a certain time. And that's been really strange for me, adjusting to working from home. And I do still have a schedule to a certain extent, but I'm much more in control of it now. Yeah. And that took some adjusting to. I've had to be quite strict with myself, because suddenly the dusting looks a little bit more appealing than it did before, and you're surrounded by the same four walls. So I don't know if that's a high or a low now that I'm saying it, to be honest. So I have found the lack of structure and the lack of interaction challenging and difficult to adapt to. But lockdown highs has been that I've spent more time at home, and I really like being at home, and I like being with my family, and life's been nice and quiet, and that suits me. That suits me quite well. I miss the spontaneity of being able to just say, let's go for a swim, or let's go some shops. And so that's been tough, but it's not been a traumatic experience for me. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. How about you, Becca?
Yeah, I've been working at home too, and I mean, I'm slightly concerned about a bag of apples that I left in my desk last March. That was isolation for the week before the university shut, and I don't know what's happened to them. This term I've started working at the hospital on Mondays, because I see some medical students there, and my first day I was the only room that I could find to work in, because long story, my room was locked and the key was in another locked room, and no one was there to unlock the first locked room. So I just found somewhere to work, and it was a windowless box, but I was so excited to be working somewhere other than this room that I was just happy. So I think, probably one of my lows has been working in the same place and just not having anywhere to go, not being able to see people. Probably my high, or at least one of them, has been more conversations with my family than, I was going to say since I was a teenager, but you don't really talk to your parents when you're a teenager. So actually, ever.
My teenager talks non-stop, if that's anything.
Yeah, no, that's true. Your teenager does talk non-stop. Yeah, so we have a standing date at 9:30 every evening with my parents, who are locked down in Dorset, and my sister, who's on her own on the west coast of Scotland. And we probably all make it about 6 times a week, and it's just been really lovely, and I have really valued that time with them.
Brilliant. So James, there is a biohazard, it sounds like, in Becca's office somewhere in the university. Maybe you need to
Yeah.
investigate the Applegate scenario. But what have you been your lockdown highs and lows?
I think for me, the highs have been innovation at work, do new things, transferring our entire program onto online, a bit like the church has. And then every lockdown, people expect a new thing. They want something different to the last lockdown. So there's been a lot of innovation, doing new things. So building my office was part of a really exciting part of lockdown one. Things I found hard. I think, well, I'm an extrovert. I love seeing people, so I really struggled not seeing people, as that's how I relax. So that's been really difficult.
Yeah.
I suppose on the other relating to work, sorry, I'm choosing two, but trying to comfort colleagues, it's been really hard, and having colleagues who've been really upset, crying down a Teams call saying, I can't do this, I need help, and you can't help them as you normally would.
Yeah. So when was the last time you cooked for more than about 3 people, James? You must, I mean, normally you cook for 20, 30, 40.
Yeah, a few big barbecues over the summer, but that was it. I miss it.
I bet you do. So what's the biggest challenge, would you say, in the context of the university at the moment? What's making life and work in the university particularly hard?
I think for me, it's supporting the students and feeling like I'm pulled in so many different directions with lots of different responsibilities that I don't feel particularly on top of anything. And I worry that there are students that are slipping through the net. The first years especially, they've had a really challenging start to their university life. And so our medics are more fortunate than some in that they do have some teaching. They've been able to go into the anatomy labs, and they have a GP placement, although even that's mostly been online. But they essentially have met the 10 people in their little teaching bubble and the few people that they live with. And so I think for me, that's the biggest challenge, is how do we support them well? How do we ensure that they are both progressing academically and in terms of professional identity formation, but also, much more importantly, how do we make sure that they're okay as human beings? Yeah.
Which ties in with what you were saying, James, really, about members of your team in tears over Zoom. Yeah. Sorry, Rachel, you were going to say.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's the sense of community. I think that is difficult to replicate. And we've got these wonderful online platforms, haven't we? And people are talking to each other, but it's really not the same as being in a classroom with people. And I think for me, because I've always worked in a very collegiate environment, and particularly when you're working in secondary schools, it's a really close-knit community of teachers. And it's like that with my team on my programme at the university as well. And I think I'm worried about my trainee teachers, because we worked really hard to give them a community within the university in the early days of the course. Then we sent them off into schools and they can build those communities. But now they're out of the university environment and they're out of their school environment. So in terms of support networks for them, it's quite challenging. And I just think, like Becca said, talking about that kind of, when you form your professional identity, when you're on a professional training program, as well as being a student at the university, you wear those two hats. And I think that can be very difficult when the trainees, when the students are doing that in isolation without anybody to emulate.
Yeah, and schools can be stressful environments anyway, but at the moment, I think they're incredibly stressful. So I wonder how much time and energy the school that they're working in has actually got to spare for them.
Yeah, I have been completely blown away by what our partnership schools are providing for our trainee
That's
teachers.
brilliant.
It's just astonishing what they're able to do. And the trainee teachers are actually thriving in that environment, in the online environment, because they're much more natural at it than perhaps people who have been teaching for 20 years and are having to relearn how to teach. Whereas the trainee teachers who are developing that practice at the same time as developing their core professional practice, they're just slotting in so seamlessly. It's been amazing.
Brilliant.
But they're still not physically there, and that's what worries me.
Yeah.
So James, how are things in the House of Fun?
Well, it's well, I think a lot of my team are still on the ground because they're essential workers. So we still have people cutting grass. We still have people looking after boats that are floating and things like that. And we have a swimming pool full of water that we have to make sure it's not leaking down onto Highfield Church. So we are looking after things. At the same time, I think is the fact that we feel we've got a generation that haven't been engaged in terms of students, and it's almost losing organizational memory. And actually, we've got a whole generation of committees that will have never played sport, or a club that's never played sport virtually for a year. And it's losing that organizational memory. And so how can we support that going through into hopefully this next academic year we will start again. But yeah, it's losing continuity that's been in place for generations.
Yeah.
So it's going to be reteaching, how does the football club run the football club? How do they do what they did before? Because of the 3-year cycle of students, and you lose people.
Yeah, because
so that's going to be a really interesting challenge, and
yeah, I mean,
and volunteers, because a lot of sport is run by volunteers.
It's a rubbish time, I think, to be a student at the moment, isn't it? Really, let's be honest. I mean, Sam's in his second year
it really is.
at York University, but he's been in York for about 6 weeks since last March. So it's just extraordinary doing everything over Zoom and doing things like looking for a house for next year and doing all of it over Zoom, but also negotiating that tricky musical chairs student thing where who am I going to live with next year, and am I going to be left with nowhere to sit, nowhere to live? So it's tricky times. So in all of this uncertainty and all of these different ways of working, how has your faith helped you, or has it been challenging to follow Jesus over the last year or so?
I don't mind going first. Yeah, I think honestly, the expression that God is our rock has never been more important to me. That He is not changed in all of this, and He's just as faithful. I think I found that a lot of the things, the disciplines that sustain my faith generally day to day, aren't there anymore. They require other people to be present, a lot of them, and so that's not the same. And I personally struggle, whereas I'm quite happy listening to a talk and learning from the Bible. I really struggle with streamed worship, to actually worship myself. So it's been really important for me to sit down at the piano, although my housemate will tell you that I don't do it as often as perhaps I would like to or should. So I think that what's been important for me is routine. I listen to the Bible in 1 year every morning, and that doesn't take as much energy as needing to actually open my Bible, because it's just literally pressing a button on my phone, and it stops me getting distracted by other things before I've done that. And then I've been finding it really, really challenging to keep in touch with friends, because as an introvert, I rely on social gatherings to kind of see lots of different people, and then I'm not, there's like one-to-one I find takes up energy. So I feel I've been bad at keeping in touch with friends, but actually I've found that the friendships I have managed to maintain have been incredibly nourishing, and we've prayed together, and long-term friendships have been really key in sustaining my faith.
Yeah, thank you, Becca. Yeah, how about you, James? James might have frozen, I think. Maybe Rachel, you ought to answer while we wait for.
I will. He's frozen with a lovely smile on his face.
It's a beautiful
with everything's been. Yeah, I have found that my weekly home group meeting.
Alpha.
Oh, we're probably waiting a little bit to catch up with you, James, I think.
Shall I keep going?
I think keep going, Rachel. I think James might be coming back in.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I was just saying that for me, having the weekly home group meeting that has been scheduled, and we've worked really hard as a group to try and keep that going, and we do it over Zoom, and that's tricky for me, having spent literally the whole day online, and I'm so fatigued. But it is so nice to speak to them and just to share experiences and pray together. And that has been the thing that forces me to stop work that evening so that I can speak with them. And that's been really, really foundational for me. But I've got to be honest, a lot of, like Becca was saying, the kind of, the structures that help us to practice our faith, I have found for me of kind of sort of flown out of into the periphery, because my work has kind of exploded a little bit, and I'm working really hard to try and just reintroduce a little bit more structure in terms of active faith, and that's a bit of an ongoing process at the moment for me.
And one of the challenges I think with working from home is, if you're not careful, it just spreads throughout the whole of the day.
It does, yeah, and that's exactly what's happened, and I need to be much stricter with myself about that.
Sure. James, I think you're back with us. Well, you might have frozen again, James.
I'm not sure.
Sorry.
Is it sometimes if you turn your camera off, it can improve the audio, but then obviously we
Am I back?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're back. So why don't you tell us about how?
Is that any better?
I think maybe a little better. Why didn't you tell us, James, how your faith has been helping you through lockdown?
So I mean, I've done 2 Alpha courses, which has been amazing. And to be a little bit selfish, it's helped me just as much as I've loved helping other people. It's been fantastic. And we're in the middle of another Alpha course at the moment, and I just love it. It is so exciting. Zoom. So that has been a real help for me, and that's really helped. I've also found that I'm having to pray along to someone else, and we have a chat in their office about how that meeting went. And when you're working from home, you can't do that, so you end up having to pray, and I do that a lot more. You've had a difficult meeting, and it's like, okay, how do I process this? Actually, probably the easiest thing is to pray, so I end up doing that.
And have you felt God's presence particularly closely, or has it sometimes felt, with the lack of routine that Becca and Rachel were talking about, that God has felt rather far off during this time?
I've definitely fallen out of routine. I am in the camp of not on YouTube. I've fallen out of that, and there's no routine anymore. And I've picked up new things, actually. I must say I've been reading the sermons of Martin Luther King, and that actually I've been trying to challenge myself in new ways, and that's been brilliant. But I think it's screen fatigue by Sunday. I cannot face another screen, and I just say I can't do this. And I think that's pushed me to other platforms. In this case, reading a book and challenging myself.
Okay, so the thought of church services coming back in person would be a good thing from your point of view.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so keen.
Yeah.
I mean, having said that, I still think it's the right thing that we haven't been meeting, even though we are allowed to, because the cases have just been so high. It's definitely been the right thing, but I can't wait until we can gather again.
Yeah.
And sing.
Yeah.
I miss singing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. I know what you mean. When we have gathered as a staff team, and
Christmas was such a treat.
yeah. Why was Christmas a treat, James?
Singing the choir at Christmas was the best Christmas present I had. To be honest, absolutely. It was brilliant. It was just ticked so many boxes of what I hadn't had since March. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
It was really fun.
So, a single tip for lockdown living? What would you? One thing you've learned that you would encourage other people to try?
Embrace your inner child and build a fort.
Where's the fort, Becca? I can't.
Well, it was this room when my desk was in my bedroom, but I rearranged it. Yeah, Louise and I built a fort and embraced our inner child, and it was just wonderful.
There you go. Who are you fighting against?
Coronavirus?
Of course. How about you? Go for it, Rach.
Yeah, mine's a bit more conventional, but get outside at least once a day. So I've started doing couch to 5K with my 13-year-old.
Oh, wow.
Really to try and get him off the screen, because he's obviously doing his schooling at home, which means he's also on a screen all day. And then in his spare time, he wants to go back on a screen and play something. So, and I was concerned that his sort of just general well-being was starting to deteriorate. So I said, let's do couch to 5K. And actually it's turned into a really nice, purposeful routine in our week. So of course being outside and of course exercising is really good for you.
Yeah.
But actually for me, it's having that sense of, right, this is what's happening tomorrow. I can actually write it in the calendar. I've got 3 things a week happening in my calendar. It's run.
There you go.
It just demarcates the week and stops it being this intimidating expanse of nothing.
Yeah.
It's been brilliant. It's been great. And we're running, so
brilliant. So how far through couch to 5K are you?
We are in the middle of our 3rd week.
Okay.
And he's been brilliant. We had a slight resistance the first morning because it was dark and it was wet.
Oh wow! So it's not just. I mean, what time are you getting him up to go running?
We're going at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Goodness me!
Yeah,
Goodness me!
I've got to be working by 8, really. So, and then he's got to get up and do school. And to be fair, by the time it gets to sort of 4:30 in the evening, I'm no good for anything. I can barely stand up. So, if I'm going to do it, it's got to be the morning, and it seems to be working well.
That's parenting the Yorkshire way, isn't it, Rachel? Hard school.
Go to bed before you get up. No, the other way around. Get up before you go to bed.
How about you, James? A tip for lockdown living, apart from lots of large barbecues when that's allowed?
Trying to achieve something tangible every day. And I was trying to make sure every day I achieved something, and be it gardening, growing something, or fixing something, or doing something with someone else, or seeing someone. So
yeah, I have been known to put things on lists that I've already done just so that I can cross them off. So, what's the best way for people to pray for you and for others in the university environment at the moment? Because there's still a lot of uncertainty. We're still not sure when we're coming out of lockdown and when things are going to normalize, or what normal will look like. So what's the best way that we can pray for you?
I think it would be really good to get people back onto campus safely. So that's students and staff, so that we can build those communities back up, those social communities. And obviously the academic work on programs is so important, but I think equally important is the social communities of for the students particularly, but also for the staff.
Yeah.
So for me, it would be that we just need to be back in person.
Right. So praying for people to be back on campus, everyone to be back on campus safely. Yeah.
I think the levels of anxiety in both students and staff are just higher than usual, whether people have anxiety as a clinically diagnosed condition or not. So I think praying freedom from anxiety for people, and especially around exams. I think there were a lot of undergraduate students who are really concerned about the format of their exams this summer, and how that's going to be managed. Last year we didn't have exams that counted, so people were given an opportunity to do some assessments to see where they were, but they automatically progressed. We can't do that this year because we can't have people going through the majority of their degree without having some sort of summative assessment. So I think especially prayer around the logistics for exams and those who are trying to plan them and manage them and invigilate them, proctor them, would be really valuable.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. James, what would you say?
I think breaking habits that people have started that aren't healthy and staying inside, not seeing people, and getting into habits that we've all fallen into because of this circumstance, and trying to get back into that healthy living, embracing life in person. And hopefully people will jump back into that and not be scared, because I think people are going to be genuinely scared to get back into what we were doing before.
Yeah.
And praying for those people.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? You watch something that was filmed on TV before the pandemic and you see people hugging and shaking hands, and it's all, oh gosh, but actually
It's jarring.
That is normal life. I was doing a funeral a while ago, just before Christmas, in the pouring rain at the burial, and at least one mourner came up and shook me by the hand, and I thought, oh gosh, I can't remember the last time anybody shook me by the hand. And you know, it's just one of those things of, wow, that's how much life has changed. So getting back into embracing life in person, you're saying, and getting out of the negative routines of just living within the four walls and living through screens, and particularly praying for the format of exams. And
I think it's more the anxiety around the exams, and the logistics.
Yeah, and getting back onto campus and the community life around the academic life resuming. Okay, well, that's brilliant, because none of those things would have occurred to me to pray for the university. So thank you guys, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Should we do that with Zoom wave? I do this and I think I feel more and more like Wallace from Wallace and Gromit all the time. It's just, anyway, thanks guys. Watching that conversation with Becca, James and Rachel back, the thing that struck me the most was the amazing degree of disruption that they had all experienced, whether that was professionally or personally, over the last year. Experiencing and managing and responding to disruption seemed to me to be the continuous thread throughout our conversation. Might be the loss of routine and structure. Rachel talked about previously having a working life that was regimented by bells, essentially, but suddenly finding herself having a routine that had no structure within it at all, no structure that she didn't generate for herself. And with that loss of routine comes also the loss of momentum that can cause, because we have to force ourselves onward. When you find yourself looking at the dusting at home and thinking that looks alluring, and finding that looking more alluring than the work you've got to finish, then you know that actually this is really challenging. James spoke about the loss of organizational memory that might come from more than a year without any organized sport within the university. And both Becca and Rachel spoke about how disruptive it has been for their new students on their courses, education and medicine, respectively, when they're trying to establish a professional identity, but face-to-face contact has been so limited. You'll recognize there have been pluses. James spoke positively about the university's capacity to innovate in the face of such extraordinary disruption, and yet all of them articulated a desire to get back to something much more like normal. Whether that was to be able to comfort colleagues, as James said, when they've had a difficult meeting, or to experience the community around the education, around the academic life, as Rachel put it, or simply to have real relationships off screen, as they all put it, suffering from acute Zoom fatigue. The gains seem to have been outweighed by the losses. It seems to have been a matter of finding the best path possible through the disruption, even if that means getting your son up at dawn to go running, or memorably building a fort in the spare bedroom. The verse that came to mind while watching the conversation back was Acts 2:42. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. That's the scriptures and the church community that's sharing communion and praying together. Devoted there has the sense of steadfastly continued. It's not an emotional statement, it's a statement about commitment and perseverance. They applied themselves to these four aspects of church life, to these four fundamental aspects of Christian discipleship. All three were honest about how the pandemic has disrupted their devotional life as well. All three articulated how difficult they're finding engaging with worship online, believing that gathering and singing together were critically important to their faith. I think we have all found through the pandemic what digital can do and actually what it can't do. That sense of real relationships can be sustained by Zoom. They can be sustained online, but they can't be created perhaps online. They can't be only online. There has to come a point where the digital has to move into the real. The loss of structure was also significant here. Many of the patterns and the routines that they'd followed to sustain their faith and on which they had come to rely had suffered disruption as well. They'd adapted, memorably adapted, Becca by listening to the scriptures and by playing the piano and being assured that God was her rock. James by reading rather than engaging online, by choosing to read the sermons of Martin Luther King and by continuing to serve through Alpha, or enjoying with Becca the best Christmas present through singing in the carol service. And Rachel by keeping in touch regularly with her small group. Those key relationships sustained over a number of years where they commit to praying for one another. But the disruption has been significant for all of them. So some questions to reflect on as we finish, either on your own or in your small group. Firstly, in what ways has the pandemic disrupted your life? Which, if any, have been positive? What have you gained that you don't want to let go of? But which have been particularly challenging, honestly? What do you most want to recover in your daily and weekly life? I suggest you pick these up at as prayer requests at the end. I also suggest that you make sure you name those disruptions, particularly when they've been hard, and give them to God. And secondly, as I've said a number of times, Acts 2:42 names four aspects of discipleship: devotion to the scriptures and to the fellowship, devotion to the breaking of bread and to the prayers. Which has been most disrupted during the pandemic for you of those four aspects? And in what practical ways could you devote yourself anew to these four aspects of discipleship as we start to emerge from lockdown? Thanks for listening, and thanks once again to Becca, James and Rachel for participating.